Some people are still logging on here, so we're going to give them about 1 or 2 more minutes before we get started. So hang on tight and we'll get started shortly. Thanks. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tracy, and I will be our moderator for the webinar today. So we're very excited for today's webinar. Our goal is to get your imagination flowing on some new ways that you can use location analytics at your organization. We are going to focus on a few specific use cases, and we are going to take a fun approach today. But before we get started, I do need to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So right now, everyone is on mute just to avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to the webinar. However, we of course want to encourage active participation. So if you have a question, just type it into the question box at the bottom right-hand side of your webinar screen. We will monitor those questions as they come in, and we'll answer as many of them as possible. We will also be live tweeting today throughout the webinar, so feel free to join in on the conversation with the hashtag HappyMapping, or follow us at ClickMaps, which you can see up there on the screen under the Twitter handle ClickMaps. I also want to introduce our speaker, Patrick Vinton. Patrick Vinton is the CTO at Analytics 8. He has over 15 years of experience in all aspects of BI rollouts. He has worked in over 100 BI environments in every major industry and co-authored 4 patents related to BI report development, SQL generation engines, and BI application server scalability. Patrick is also the product architect for ClickMaps, and you can see Patrick and his very cute son up there on the screen. So with that, I think I will go ahead and turn it over to Patrick.
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks everybody for joining today. As Tracy mentioned, we're going to be going through some 5 kind of interesting approaches and interesting examples of location analytics, and most of them are based upon things that we've heard about from our customers. So we're excited to show you those. Let's go ahead and go through the 5 things that we're going to talk about real quick to just kind of set the stage. The first thing that we're going to show is a real-time mission control dashboard. So a lot of times we see our customers that will have a very large monitor or group of monitors up on their wall inside their mission control center. And it's updating sometimes even in real time. And we're going to show how to use our new HTML marker features, customized pop-ups, and even Esri integration. So Esri is a GIS server, and we'll talk some more about that here in just a moment. The second thing we want to talk about is the ability to kind of close the loop on your analysis within ClickMaps. So the whole point of having dashboards and analytics is to identify anomalies and problems. And then once you find and isolate those things, you want to take action on it. So with ClickMaps, it's got the framework to go ahead and close the loop on that. And we're going to show an example of live integration with the trouble ticketing system and some system diagnostics and things like that. The third thing we're going to talk about is crime analysis. So very few of us are in law enforcement here on the call today. I do see that we have some here that are in the public sector and in law enforcement. But this one was kind of a fun example because it was unexpected, and that's the theme of today. But it does share some best practices that we see across many industries. So we're going to do some more things with some customized pop-ups, some real-time searches, and some density analyses with radial plots. The fourth thing we're going to cover today is kind of traditional. I mean, this is what a lot of people think about when they think about maps, which is looking at your sales by markets or by territories. But our approach is pretty unique. And the reason it's unique is the way we're able to do density analyses with radial plots and what we call spider plots. Other solutions and other platforms call them flowcharts. But kind of our approach to this and what we've seen some of our customers do is pretty unique. So even though the subject itself may not be unique, their approach is. Another one that's kind of closely related, it's in a different industry, but it's hospital network planning. And so again, this by itself is not necessarily unique, but you'll see here very shortly the approach is unique. And once again, a lot of the kind of the best practices that we touched on before will also be relevant here when we talk about hospital network planning. So before we get into the demo, we've got just one more slide. And I think it's important to set the stage, what's behind this. So ClickMaps is an extension to the Qlik platform. So it does work with both QlikView and QlikSense. And it is the engine that allows you to have location analytics and mapping visualizations in your Qlik dashboards. As you're going to see here in just a moment, it allows you to plot points or markers, or it also allows you to plot polygons or territories. It does work with or without a GIS system. So pretty much the default GIS system out there is by a company named Esri or ESRI. That suite of products is called ArcGIS. So everything you see today works without a GIS system, except for very few exceptions. And when those come out, I'll make very sure to point those out to you. And that's important because you don't have to have this expensive, complicated infrastructure in place if you don't need it. But if you have it, that's great. We can leverage that. And so I'm going to show examples of both ways. And the last important thing to note is that everything you see today works on any browser, including touch devices like an iPad. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the demo. So as Tracy said, we're going to start off with some fun, kind of whimsical applications here. And we already took a gratuitous baby picture. Everybody on the internet loves lists. So we've got a webinar that's based upon lists, the top 5 things. People on the internet love babies, and they also love kittens and puppies. So finally, to kind of round out that theme, what we're showing here is our live cams of kittens and puppies. And this one is just sitting there sleeping, but I assure you it's live. I think you can kind of see one back here playing around. So while this is not really have much of a business application, it is a really important way of demonstrating the power of what we call our HTML markers. So what you may see in other solutions are things like, the ability to plot bubbles on a map, or some solutions even let you plot icons on a map. A few even also let you plot polygons or shapes on a map. But QlikMaps is the only one that gives you full control to plot anything you want on a map. And so this is an example of an HTML marker. So anything you can do on a web page, you can also do here, including having a real-time camera. So let's go to one other example why we've got this up. This is kind of another fun one. And this is something that I pulled together a couple weeks ago. So about a week and a half ago, American football season ended with the Super Bowl, and leading up to that, we had our conference champions. And I was sitting around the house with some friends of mine, and we were watching a couple of the games. And just like a lot of people do these days when they're watching television, they're not just looking at the television, they're also looking at their phones and their laptops. They're doing things to augment their viewing experience. So in our case, we were doing things like looking at player stats, player biographies, or a couple times we were looking at rules of the game and our fantasy football scores. But where we spent most of our time in real time with the game on was looking at social media to see reactions from fans in real time. And this is really especially interesting when there was a controversial call that was made by the referees. And so, again, this probably doesn't have much of a business value, but it's kind of a fun example of something that you can quickly throw together. This took me a few minutes while I was sitting on the sofa with some buddies. But let's take a step back and talk about what we've actually got here. So this is kind of shows the building blocks for building a mission control dashboard. We've got a dashboard that's updating in real time based upon something in our environment. So it's possible, depending on your industry, that actually real-time Twitter feeds would be interesting to you. But there's more practically, it's probably going to be something else. And so I'm going to show you an example of a dashboard now that's really similar to what one of our telecom customers does. And so what this is looking at here is a mission. It's kind of it was a mock-up that we did that we closely emulated one of our telecommunications customers did. The same exact application would be the exact same thing for utilities, be it gas or electricity. What you're looking at your network, and you're looking at some things in real time and some things historically. So some things you want to look at historically, like what's the historical health of this particular connection. In this case, we call this a trunk, or that connects the two major data centers. And you want to look at like what was average over time, and what was the usage, and what was the uptime, what was the downtime. So those are the kinds of things that would traditionally be inside your Qlik data model. And that's great. So we've proven we can do that here. But what we're also showing here is we're actually looking at some things that are important to see in real time. And that's like some of these, in this case, these KPIs we're looking at are these network metrics that are important to the data centers. Those are things that, you know, they might be somewhat interesting in real time, in near real time, or historically looking backwards. Well, really what matters in a mission control center is these kinds of things need to be real time. So one of the things that we can see here, you know, I don't have a legend on this screen, but one of the things you can see here with the color of red is that we've got a problem that's creeping up in between this trunk or this connection here. There's a couple things we can do to look at that. Right now, looking at the logical network, but the reality is there's going to be situations where there's a layer below that. There really isn't just a straight pipe or circuit between these two data centers. The reality is there's probably going to be something else that's in there that's going to be interconnecting those things. And so if I want to look at that, I can actually click on this layer right here. So this is another layer that we've got. And for the first time today that we've seen, and one of the last times, we're actually showing some integration with real-time integration with a GIS system. And in this case, this network of fiber optic lines that we're looking at is not inside of our Qlik data model. It's actually externally in our ArcGIS system. Admittedly, that was just kind of a gratuitous way of showing that we can work with a GIS system, but we don't have to have it. But let's go ahead and drill into the detail and look and see what we want to do to take action upon this. And so this is where we go into the step number 2 inside of our unexpected use cases. First one was to show a real-time mission control dashboard, and I think we've shown several examples there. Now what we want to do is we see an anomaly and we want to take action on it. So this is now we're going from a large monitor that's up on the side of the mission control center down to somebody's desktop or even to their iPad and mobile device. In this pop-up, just as with our HTML markers, anything you can do in a web page you can also do here. So just on a regular web page where you can have tabs and you can have mashups with other systems, the same is also true here. So we can see, in this case, we've got a portal or a gateway real-time into our trouble ticketing system. As you can see down here, just to know that I'm not cheating when I say this, this is actually real-time from here. So you can Google this and look up this network ID to see that this truly is coming in real-time. You can see the status of that. Let's go ahead and look at some of the other things that we can do on here. So we see an anomaly on there, and just as we could do in a regular web page, now it's time to run some diagnostics. So directly without even leaving our dashboard, we can start performing diagnostics on our system. And then finally, we see, you know what, this kind of throughput isn't what we would expect. Now it's time to perform some sort of maintenance. We want to close the loop on the anomaly we just found. So here's where we're going to go. Without ever leaving the dashboard, we're going to say, we're going to perform an action. And at this point, we could perform a write back or perform some sort of action directly here within the pop-up without ever having to leave our interface. So to take a step back, we've shown a mission control dashboard. We've kind of taken that paradigm and ran with it and been able to show you the second thing, which is being able to close the loop on your analysis. Okay, so far what we've been looking at ClickSense. ClickMaps does work for both ClickMaps, for ClickSense, as well as for ClickView. For those of you who aren't familiar with the differences, they're just different flavors of the same platform. The basic functionality is very similar across the platforms, and the functionality is identical for ClickMaps for ClickView and ClickMaps for ClickSense. So to that point, let's go ahead and go now to ClickMaps for ClickView and look at this data set. So what kind of drove this particular analysis was pretty interesting. We have a customer of ClickMaps, and I'm not allowed to tell you who it is. I'm actually not allowed to tell you many of their use cases, or I have to be very vague about it. And I'm for sure cannot tell you some of the things that they found and discovered in it, in the patterns. What I can tell you is it's a U.S. federal agency that is using ClickMaps to analyze behavior of criminal activity. And what they were able to do is they were able to identify things that they weren't able to before. And let me explain what I meant by not able to before. Of course, this large federal agency had an army of data scientists at their disposal. Of course they had that. A lot of big organizations do. Some do, some don't. But the difference was, and if you've ever watched any sort of crime television, you always see like the cops that are on the street or the detectives, they're always having to go back to the guy in IT, you know, the kind of quirky guy in IT that helps them perform their analyses. Now, by using Click and ClickMaps, they were able to actually give that kind of power to everybody involved, the beat cops, the detectives, the chief of police, et cetera, and everybody up and down the hierarchy of that particular organization. So with that said, that was kind of the motivating factor for that. And then I'm going to show you some examples that we've got with some public data here. So what the data we're looking at here was some public data from the Chicago Open Data Initiative. This is all of the crimes that happened in 2015, broken down by this hierarchy, that the way that the law enforcement in Chicago looks at itself. So it's kind of got a three-level hierarchy. The top level is a community area, and then you can drill down to a ward, and then finally down to a beat, which is where the individual policemen and detectives are assigned. The way this one is calibrated is we've got like the top offenses here that are color-coded. The way the polygons are colored, in this case it's community area that we're looking at. The primary criminal activity is the center of the polygon, and then the perimeter of the polygon, or the outline, is the secondary activity. So what we can see just by glancing at this map, this kind of orangish brown, which designates narcotics or drug activity, there's a very high correlation between that and violence, between that and battery. And so that's something that we can see right away just by glancing at the map. So we see that, you know, the crime patterns near the loop and near downtown and some of the affluent areas north of the loop, that's not as big of an issue. The biggest issue up there is theft, and that's probably what we would expect. So just as a gut check at a high level, these kind of make sense, but it is interesting to see the correlation. Let's go ahead and start drilling now. We're going to drill down, sorry, my connection to my Click server timed out as I was talking. Okay, so what we're doing now is we just drilled down from community area to ward. And so that's something, let's take a quick time out before we go on anymore. Perhaps not unexpected, but it's worth pointing out if maps are new to you. This whole concept of drilling down through a geography is a very natural thought process and workflow. It's very natural to start at the continent, then the country, then the state, then the county, then the postcode. And so, you know, the same applies here. The interesting thing, and that's unique to this case, is the shapes that we're looking at here are not standard. I mean, these, you know, there's not like a standard community area or ward or beat definitions. These definitions were provided also by the city of Chicago, but it does prove that ClickMaps can work, and it works well with customized polygons and customized shapes. So you can have those given to you by your data provider, or you can create them on your own. So let's continue with that workflow, and we see, let's suppose we see something here, and we're going to keep drilling down. And we see already an interesting pattern here. We'll go ahead and turn off one of these layers. We see a lot of things are happening right along the interstate here, but specifically near this sports arena here. So maybe there's something going on here. So let's go ahead and drill all the way down to this particular beat, which is by the sports arena, and start to see if we can figure out any patterns here. So again, this is where I can't go into too many details, but I can kind of tell you some of the things about the thought process and the power of ClickMaps that you can do with this. So let's look at the top one here. Let's look at just battery, and we'll select these batteries here. What we can see here, we're just looking at this one particular type of crime, and one of the things I wanted to look at was, how does this type of criminal activity evolve over time? Can we see patterns in things happening in particular neighborhoods, and if we move it out? So something else you've probably seen if you've ever watched any crime television is, you know, there may be some sort of drug activity, for example, in a particular street block, and the police move in and they increase patrols on that street block, and then what happens is, you know, the drug activity opens up a few blocks over. And so what happens is, you know, they basically keep moving and shifting this thing around here. So in this case, I don't see really any patterns. So let's figure out what else we can perhaps look at here. So maybe there's something that we want to see is perhaps it's something that's near maybe near a bus stop. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to evoke a Google search query. So I'm going to tap on this icon. Here I'm going to start typing, and in real time I'm going to start reaching outside of our Qlik data model to perform a Google search query. And what just happened is ClickMaps went out to Google, performed a real-time analysis, and dropped the results of that on a map. Now that they're on the map, we can interact with them just like anything else. And I'll show you some examples of that. So this is one of the types of things that they looked at, and I'll go into this just a little bit more later. One of the other interesting things they did, let me actually just go to a different place where I know there's a pretty interesting trend. And this is an example here of the movement that I was talking about. Perhaps there was some sort of criminal activity, and then they increased patrols and watches here, and it shifted over here to the east, and they increased patrols over here, and then it shifted to the west. So this is kind of an interesting approach. If you take a step back, this is a unique way of looking at how things change over time. So a lot of people think that you must have animations to look at the way things change over time. And as you can see here, that's not the case. This is a very usable and very palatable way of looking at movement over time. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at you know, implementing a location analytics solution or any type of visualization. There are often ways of representing another dimension without having to animate it. One of the things that I will kind of allude to is what they were able to find, which is also for sure was very unexpected to me, at least. They were able to actually virtually visit each of these crime locations and see what they had in common. So I can't tell, I'm not allowed to tell you what they found in common, but there was something that was completely unexpected that they found by virtually visiting all of these crime locations and seeing that there was some things that were very often in common with this particular type of crime that they were monitoring. So this is another way that they were able to look at and find patterns. They were able to perform Google search queries. They were able to virtually visit those locations. They were able to analyze them over time. Those are the kinds of things you're able to do in ClickMaps. Another thing that they were able to do, which is pretty interesting, this is controversial, but becoming ubiquitous in many cities across the world, are real-time street cams. As you can see over here in the corner, as you see people moving, this is a real-time street cam. And I know a lot of cities have these things in play right now. So this is kind of a unique way of being able to expose these live cams to end users, and in this case, law enforcement, without always having to go back, as you see, like on crime television, getting IT involved to help you out. This is something they were able to put in those people's fingertips. Okay, I'm seeing some some questions coming in. Go ahead and please keep them coming in. That's good. Some of these things I'll be talking about here in a moment. So I do encourage you, as Tracy mentioned, to keep questions coming in, and I'll go ahead and take a reminder if everybody wants to go ahead and follow along with the hashtag HappyMapping or the Twitter handle @ClickMaps. That would be encouraged as well. So in the interest of time, I just noticed the time. Go ahead and refresh because I'm sure my connection timed out. I noticed we're running a little bit long already. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to combine the fourth and fifth kind of unexpected uses. So number 4 was talked about sales and marketing territory planning. The fifth one was about hospital network planning as well. And so what you'll see is that a lot of the fundamentals that go in one industry, there's a perfect analog into other industries. So in this example, we're looking at a healthcare dashboard now, but instead of looking at hospitals as kind of the center of our analyses, these could be our stores, and these could be our customers. Or you could have the opposite would also be true within if you're looking at a field sales organization, kind of the individual ones would be the physicians you're visiting, and these could be your sales staff. These could, if it was retail, these could be your bricks and mortar. That would be these things. That all the concepts are the same. And so hopefully, as we're going through, and I'm kind of tickling your imagination with these things, you're able to see how these translate to your particular industry. If not, go ahead and try to shoot a question my way, and I'll try to figure out some ways to draw comparisons to your industry. Okay, so in this example, what we're looking at, just to take a step back, this is kind of what people traditionally think of when they think about a mapping visualization within a data discovery tool. They think of having bubbles on a map or maybe polygons on a map. We already showed some of that in the prior example when we were looking at crime. But in this case, we're looking at bubbles and icons. So far in ClickMaps, we've shown polygons, we've shown lines, now we're showing bubbles, and we're also showing icons. And the pièce de résistance was that the kitty cam. So we're able to show anything we want on a map, anything you could possibly have. So in this case, each of the bubbles is our the patients that visited these hospitals. If it's blue, that meant the primary language that they speak is English. If it's yellow, that means the primary language they speak is Spanish. The way this is calibrated now is we have another metric that's driving the size of the bubble. As we've got it exposed over here, right now we've got the bubble size based upon number of visits they made to a hospital or to one of the clinics that was in our network. What we could do easily, just as we can do with anything else in Qlik, is this can be driven by a variable, and now we have it based upon kind of the revenue that was brought in. So this is the amount of the insurance copay that was brought in by patient. What's a little bit unexpected when we were working with some of our customers in healthcare and in hospitals and hospital networks was often the number of visits was more important than the money that was coming in. So of course, the human side of us, we don't want to think about health and money. That's not the way we like to look at that. But the reason it was important to these hospitals, or was often important to them, is because it helped them plan their hospital networks better. So if somebody made more than one visit to a location, that meant something was kind of potentially broken in the system. That meant that they had a bad experience at one location and had to go to the other. It meant that they went for one service and they were to one location and they had to go another location to fulfill that other service. So let's talk about a couple of those examples. One of the features that you haven't seen yet is this concept of what's called a spider plot. And the spider plot is what's known in other tools as a flow chart. And when I click on this, I think you'll kind of see what I mean. So when I click on these hospitals, I can see which all patients visited these hospitals. And so what's interesting about these is we don't just see the relationships between these entities, but we also see the directionality of these entities. So we can see this particular hospital here, which is Baylor Medical Center. We can see a lot of its traffic and a lot of its patients come from the north and from traditionally affluent areas of Dallas. However, when we look at this one, we see that we see that there's patients that are going literally right past these other two hospitals in our network to visit this one. So we have to understand why, and that's important to understand so we can know how to plan our network better. And so that helps us to know whether we need to add services to another location, do train for our physicians, we need to do better marketing, etc. So, you know, what we can do is we can kind of spot check a few of these and see what kind of services they were getting. So we see that one was getting the flu or cold. Yeah, for sure they could have done that general checkup. They could have done those pretty much anywhere. So that wasn't the case. It certainly wasn't proximity the case. But what we can do is we can easily glance at most of these people that were traveling past other hospitals. They were Spanish speakers. And we can tell just by the name of this place that it caters more to Spanish-speaking population. So what that means is for our network planning, we need to do a couple things potentially. One is we need to add more Spanish-speaking staff to these hospitals. Or if they're already there, that means we need to market it better. The thing we have to keep in mind, though, as we do that, as we turn this back on, sometimes these folks, let's actually go ahead and close those out. And let's examine a few of these individuals that made multiple visits. Now, so we can tell these two people here visited multiple hospitals. So let's click on this one, and just for grins, we'll click on that one. And we look and see what kind of services this patient did. So we see that this person made one visit for flu and cold, another one for geriatrics. And this person, you know, they had a cold, but they also had some sort of oncology treatment as well. So if we look at what's going on here at Mi Doctor, we see that that type of services are not offered there. So we need to do things to help that patient's experience be better. We need to either add those services to Mi Doctor, or we need to find out why they went here for that first place, that other ailment in the first place. What can we do to coax them to make their experience easier to go to a single entity? So let's go ahead and turn those off. For the sake of privacy, we're not using the patient's name, we're just using random IDs here. So let's turn our spider plot back on, and let's look at some of these real big bubbles. You know, why are these people making so many visits? And so what we can do is click on those, and we can see, wow, this person had 4 trips to the emergency room. So that should be a really big red flag. You know, it's possible this person was really, really unlucky and really did have to go to the emergency room 4 times in a month. But what likely was happening, there was some sort of fraud going on. There was either some sort of insurance fraud, or there was likely that there was some sort of thing where the person was a drug abuser and was going from hospital to hospital to hospital to get prescriptions from each of them. And that's one of the interesting things, that even though that wasn't the intent of this dashboard, similar to one of our customers that did the same thing, they were actually able to accidentally identify some of these situations here of fraudulence and misuse of the system. So now that we've identified this kind of fraudulent behavior with these outliers, let's go ahead and eliminate those from an analysis so we can take a better look at what's going on. So far, you know, we've kind of shown the value of looking at things, you know, this metric by the number of visits. Now is the time where it actually does kind of make sense to see what people are paying now that we've got those outliers out of the way. And part of the reason we want to do that is again, to do network planning. So a big part of network planning is not just augmenting services at existing hospitals in your network, but it's also to recruit new hospitals to join part of your network, or to possibly even build a new one. And so let's say we have a business rule, or it's kind of our goal, that we want to have all of our patients within 2 miles of you know, we're in an urban area, we want to have all of our patients within 2 miles of a particular hospital in our network. But what we're going to do now is something we haven't seen yet, which is called a radial plot. And we have all kinds of different types of radial plots, but The one I'm going to show you here is pretty straightforward. What we can do is we can click on a point, and the way I've got this particular radial plot configured is it's going to put 3 rings. The first one is half a mile out, the next one is a mile out, another one is a full 2 miles out, which is kind of our benchmark for where we want to have everybody in our network be part of that. And so as we can see pretty easily here, we've got this big patch of people over here that's outside of our network. So that's one way of using ClickMaps to identify ways to enhance your network. So let me take a quick time out and remind everybody that even though we're talking about hospital networks now, this could also apply to basically any industry. If this were a bricks and mortar store, this would be your customers and your stores rather than hospitals. It could be the same things if you're a field sales force, the people who you were calling upon and your salesmen in the field. So a lot of these fundamentals do apply across industries. So even if you're not in healthcare, please kind of try to follow along and see how this would apply to you as well. Okay, so this is one way of doing territory planning, which is this use of radial plots. And this is a very basic use of radial plots, but you can already see, even with this basic use, we can see there's a big group of outliers here. So that's one way of doing this. So let me go ahead and turn those off. Actually, I'm even going to turn off my patients now, and I'm going to turn on this one, which is a density map. And so this is a different way of looking at things in aggregate. So remember when we were back on the crime dashboard, we were aggregating things up by community area or ward or by beat. In this case, we're kind of doing a loose aggregation where we're merging them together to look at densities. So once again, boy, we can really see this hot spot up here, and we can see that there's, you know, if we could, it would be really nice to put a hospital right in the middle of that. So let's see what we can do to do exactly that. So one of the most common things to do when you're trying to do network planning is you want to see, is there an existing hospital that you can recruit to be part of your network? So let's go back to our Google search and do just that. So let's do a search, and let's look for clinics. And as before, we did a real-time Google search, and we're able to plot the results of those on the map. And so, you know what? Quest Care, Urgent Care might be a good candidate for us to try to recruit to be part of our network. Let's go ahead and turn our radial plots back on. And I'll go ahead and turn on the radial plots on our other hospitals that are in our existing network. You can see, wow, that gives us most of our coverage. We say, well, you know what, for whatever reason, Quest Care was not, you know, a candidate to be part of our network. And besides, if we shifted things just a little bit farther west, we could get all these guys here. So this is some of the what-if analyses that you can do with ClickMaps. So what-if analyses are an important part of any dashboarding kind of workflow, analytical workflow. And it's very important that the mapping solution you choose also has this type of functionality. And so the way we can do that here is we already kind of did a what if by doing a Google search. We can also do more of a thumb in the air type what if. What if, generally speaking, we could do one over here, you know, right off this highway right here. But if I place this one right here, what can I do with it? And now that it's on the map, I can interact with it just as if it were any other point on my Click data model. So that includes going to Street View by double-clicking on it. But in this case, what's important is that also includes it's a candidate for being a radial plot. And so we can see we just did the same sort of analyses with a marker that was not inside of our data model with the ones that were in there. So one last thing that we can do while we're here, you know, we showed an example of a real-time integration with your Esri ArcGIS system. This is another really interesting thing that hospitals do a lot here. They want to look at, they have, you know, sophisticated GIS systems that have a lot of demographics data and travel data and you know, all kinds of data that's there. So let me show you one way to tap into that. So this layer right here actually is coming in real time from the US Census Bureau. This data is not inside of the Click data model. And what it is showing is The redder the area means the younger this demographic is. So if we click on that one, we see that the median age is pretty young. It's just under 30. If we click at this one, the average age is 51. So if it's this gray, that's right at about the national average median age for individuals. So in this case, we're just looking at ages of people, but we could also be looking at other sorts of demographics like affluence and wealth, employed, unemployed, ages, all those kinds of things. Those are available out there. And a lot of them are actually hosted for free by the U.S. Census or by other entities across the world. And for sure, if you have access to, if you have your own Esri ArcGIS system, or even if you have Esri ArcGIS online, those are the kinds of perfect things that you can do for these layers that can come in externally real time with ClickMaps. Okay, so that's really it for the demo now. Let's go ahead and do just a little more housekeeping. And we talked about a lot of things, and hopefully I made it clear along the way why ClickMaps instead of some other ones. If you haven't already started looking at other solutions, chances are you're going to. So let me go ahead and explain some of the big differences, because I think that's important. The first thing is that we do not have an extra server in our architecture, logical or physical. And this is important because it makes it very easy to scale out to users, because you're not having to go back and revisit the size of your server. It also means that it's way easier to deploy, less security concerns, etc. So it's a very simple architecture. It's got all third-party licensing included. So what that means is, you know, for most of the functionality that you saw today, except for when I was talking to a paid-for-use Esri system, all third-party licensing was included. So that means you don't have to go out and get a separate Google Maps license or a separate Mapbox license, or et cetera. And that's really important, especially if you have a large user base. We were doing we were in a competitive situation against another solution. They had 2,000 Salesforce reps out in the field that were going to be accessing the solution from an iPad. For our solution, all of that was included in the cost of the annual maintenance. For the other solution, they had to go out and buy their own separate Google license. And what their cost estimates were, that was going to be over $1.1 million a year just for the Google licensing. So let's say, all right, I don't have 2,000 salespeople. My user base is much smaller than that, so that's not a big deal. Well, it actually is a big deal, because all of those third-party licenses are based upon usage, so it makes the cost very difficult to predict. So kind of what those top two things mean together is the total cost of ownership is very predictable. It means, you know, as you grow, or no matter what the usage is, it's very, very easy to predict the cost. So it's one thing I'd encourage you to do if you evaluate other solutions, is try to understand the total cost of ownership. And most of the time you're going to find out the answer is, well, it depends. And that's never, really a tough thing to be in the situation for. The other thing is simple development. So ClickMaps, unlike other solutions, was developed for the ground up specifically for Click. And so what that means is the development paradigm is going to be very similar to building a pie chart. The same thing goes for end users. You know, we know exactly the language and the things that Click end users like to use. We like to use the same language. So that means there's going to be very little, if no, training required there too. As I mentioned, you know, because of the simple architecture, deployment's simple. The pricing model is very simple as well. I showed you several examples of reaching outside the Click data model. I showed you integrating with ArcGIS systems. I showed you integrating with trouble ticket systems. You know, you could do the same thing with weather. It's super simple, difficult to show, but I promise you full functionality from all devices. Okay, so for those of you that are ClickSense owners or are evaluating ClickSense, I think it does make sense to take just a quick pause to compare ClickMaps to what you get out of the box, in case it's not clear already. So both solutions can plot the bubbles or circles on a map, and I think we showed that at the end when we were talking about the hospital network planning. But as soon as you want to do something sophisticated like control the coloring, that's where the out-of-the-box solution starts breaking down. So the simple business use case there is, if my sales are above a certain threshold, I want to color it green. If it's below, I want to color it red. That very simple use case is not possible out of the box. You're not also able to do icons. So if you remember the back to the hospital demo when you saw that red cross on there, real simple. It was make it real easy to use, but you can't do that unfortunately out of the box. Markers, one thing that wasn't in here was we talked about the HTML markers, and that was the things we showed at the very beginning when we started off kind of fun with the kitty cam. Then we showed the Sparkline of the real-time network. So those kinds of things you certainly can't do out of the box. Both solutions can plot polygons and territories, but the out-of-the-box solution starts to break down when you want to have custom polygons. So keep in mind that's what we showed when we were talking about the Chicago crime, the community areas, the wards, and the beats. The multi-layer, I just kind of zoomed over that when I was showing to you because it's so intuitive, the ability to turn on hospitals and patients and zip codes and all those things, and then pull in your Esri things. It's so intuitive, it almost seems, of course it would be there, but unfortunately it's not there out of the box. And the same thing for the drilling, and I took a pause for that when I was showing you earlier. Drilling is a very intuitive workflow. To drill from down a geography hierarchy is crucial, and you want to take advantage of it. Not only do you want to take advantage of it, it's actually pretty critical. With the out of the box, whatever level you start at is what you end at. So what that means is if you start at the zip code level, you're always at the zip code level. So I'm not going to go through all of these things. You saw most of these things already. We have several ways of reaching outside the click data model to show other pieces of data. That's one of the big pushes in that, and and also even Click itself is starting to push third-party and syndicated data. You can see that their commitment to that with Data Market. We were happy to be ahead of that curve. This is something that we've been touting for quite some time now. And then finally, the last thing we can do is not just displaying the data on a map, it's actually analyzing it in the context of distance and location. And so we showed you that with the spider plots. We showed some real basic examples of the radial plots. There's some more complicated ones that I'd love to show you if we had time. The ability to aggregate KPIs by distance and perform what-if analyses. Those are the kinds of things that we can do out of the box, or that we can do, but you can't do out of the box. Okay, I'm going to take a pause real quick to start looking at some of the questions. Okay, we had some questions about trial copies. Yes, we can work with you to get a trial copy. One of the things before we wrap is Tracy's going to work, explain to you about what next steps are and how we can follow up with you should you choose. That conversation will also lead to things about pricing. Big difference there is if you are working with a partner or coming to us direct. We do have a large group of international resellers across the globe. So that's why I'd like to reserve specific pricing details for that. I can tell you now, though, ClickMaps for ClickView is priced by the environment. It's not priced by the end user. So if you have a production environment, it's one license for that entire production environment. And there would be a separate license for each pre-production environment. Want to keep it very, very simple. Then in the ClickSense world, we kind of do it by buckets of tokens or groups of tokens. So if you're between 1 and 25 tokens, it's one price. And 25 and 50 tokens, it's another price. And so we want to keep it very simple and make it very easy for you to grow, but most importantly, to make it predictable. The predictability is probably, besides the functionality, is the #1 differentiator of ClickMaps to its competitors. You always know what the cost is going to be. We had a question: is ClickMaps owned and sold by Click? No, it's actually it is a third-party tool that's created by us. As I just mentioned, we have worldwide network of resellers. As of now, you cannot put ClickMaps on the click price list. I think that's true for all solutions, not ClickMaps. That's something we've been working with them to try to figure out. I have some questions about how we do a lot of things. How do you do a lot of this stuff? A lot of this stuff we actually have online. We have a bunch of videos actually on clickmaps.com that show you how to build these basic maps. We have a bunch of short training and how-to videos. Most of them are like 2 minutes or less. So that does two things. That shows you that it actually is simple. Another thing is you can zoom through a bunch of features and get ramped up very quickly. So I'd encourage you to go to clickmaps.com and start to look for those resources there. I'd also encourage you to go to clickmaps.com and look at some of the old recordings of other webinars. And those are going to have a more exhaustive we go through a lot of the features one by one. Whereas today we kind of focused on some very specific use cases. Yeah, there's no functional difference between ClickMaps for ClickView and ClickMaps for ClickSense. The development paradigm is slightly different for multiple layers, but the basic concept is the same. Yes, this video will be has been recorded, and it will be distributed to you afterwards. I had a question to compare it to one of our competitors again. I want to go back to the slide again and talk about that. You know, pretty much every bullet on this map is on this page is what separates us from the competitor that was mentioned. The competitor has an extra server in its architecture. That makes it difficult and cumbersome to both install. Installation can be cumbersome, and it has extra security concerns because you have to open up things in your firewalls. But it also means it's something that you always have to consider as your usage increases and or your number of users increase. So this is a big thing that you always have to come back to. And you know, the big thing is you know, we were developed from the ground up for Click. We know how the Click community speaks. We know what the end users want. Right? We didn't try to force our solution into a different architecture. It was built from the ground up for Click, and I think you can see that once you start developing with it, you can move very, very fast with it. Okay, sorry, just combing through some of the other questions. Give me just a moment, please. We had a question about getting access to not just the recording, but also the PowerPoint. I think we can get, yes, we can get that to you upon request. Tracy will talk about that when we wrap up here in just a moment. Questions on how to create the custom territories. There actually is a video on clickmaps.com that talks about that. For that particular person that asks, there's actually a lot of content in our online knowledge base that talks specifically to that. So I guess that's a good time to take a kind of a timeout and talk about some of the other assets. So far, most of the things I've been talking about are public, but ClickMaps customers and ClickMaps partners also have access to an online knowledge base. A lot of the questions that you're asking over here are also answered there. We spent a lot of time in that online knowledge base talking about custom territories.